Welcome, everyone, and Happy New Year. Happy Western New Year to all of you who are listening in, have tuned in to this already next webcast into the new year by the Conference Board. We're thrilled to have you here. My name is John Metzelaar. I am the co-leader of the Innovation and Productivity Institute by the Conference Board, and I also own the European Innovation Council. The subject of today is one that may have intrigued you to some degree because it's called toggling. Now, many of you will ask, so what is toggling all about? Fortunately, we had a subtitle and that gave it at least a bit away. We're talking about enhancing your strategic capabilities to step change your innovation results. I'm very excited about the topic. I think you're going to like it. It builds off of a few things that we have already talked about in previous webcasts. So I'm keen to get into the matter at hand. Having said that, as always, I want to do some housekeeping and make sure you can follow this session at a leisurely pace, I guess. One, asking questions. Please, we invite questions at all times. Please ask them at the bottom left of your screen. And I will weave them into the conversation as I see fit. If for one reason or another I will not be getting to them, we will cover them through email at the end of this session. The second is you're free to download the presentation at the end of the session, and you can do that through file download at the bottom center of your screen. Third, you can toggle between full screen or a bit closer view. By clicking any of the four arrows at the top right of the screen. Evaluations, we take your feedback seriously. That's how we grow, that's how we get better. So please take those 2, 3, 4 minutes at the end of the session to provide you with your honest and open feedback, and don't hold back, we want to learn. Fifth and last is share this program with your colleagues. It is going to be, if you like it, which I hope you do, which I hope you will. It will be available on demand after this session, about 24 hours after this session will have been done. Okay, so one last thing on housekeeping, which is sort of adjacent to it, is Cpe credits. Yes, you can earn them in this session as well. Type your full name and email address in the space provided, number one. Number two, make sure you stay very attentive because you're going to get 3 pop-ups. If you miss one, you don't get the credit. So please be full on. And stay online for the entire webcast is the other requirement. And unfortunately, you can only get it if you attend the live webcast, not the on-demand version later on. And so you guys being here, you are already eligible. With that, I want to go and not talk about myself anymore, but introduce Pam Henderson. Many of you will know her already. She has been with us already for maybe 3, 4 webcasts before. It's always a pleasure to have her as she keeps on developing her capability, her insights, and the material that she's going to share, as you'll see in a second. Pam is PhD, but most importantly is an author of a very, very good book, which she's going to introduce or reintroduce, as well as the CEO of New Edge, I guess in short, consultancy. With that, I am keen to get into toggling. And so Pam, I'm sure you are as well, so I'm turning it over to you. Thanks again for joining the Conference Board, and we look forward to listen to your insights. Go for it.
John, thank you so much. It's really a delight to be back, and Happy New Year to everyone in the West, and looking forward to the New Year in the East. So as John mentioned, today's conversation is about toggling, but it's really about increasing the strategic capabilities in your organization. For yourself and for your team members, and for those of you in HR thinking about how you can improve the strategic thinking capabilities of your teams and also improve the innovation outcomes. So let me jump in. John was kind enough to just mention a little bit about us. My firm is really about helping companies grow and helping them innovate both. We work at many different levels. We've done corporate strategies, digital strategy, innovation strategies, product, process, and building capabilities. And it's really built on the basis of something we call opportunity thinking, which you'll learn more about today. Founded in 2002, we do global work, and we've actually broadened our impact by bringing in a wide range of what we call ecosystem members. So they're subject matter experts or people just with really interesting perspectives that we engage on a regular basis. So that helps broaden our impact. These are a few of our clients. So we work both business to business and business to consumer, and you'll notice it's quite broad. And the reason for it being broad is partially toggling between B2B and B2C and different industries and different ends of the supply chain. And that really helps us think more strategically. So the first question I've got is, how do you build strategic capabilities? And I'm hoping that some of you will throw in some answers. So I know there'll be a little bit of a lag, but John and I have planned in a few breaks. And so during these breaks, John's going to raise questions, but also put in any thoughts or answers to questions I might ask you. We do really want your questions. We'll see if you can't best the last webinar where we had a lot of questions. So be lively and challenge us. But it's interesting. We've seen companies try to increase the strategic capabilities of their staff through a number of mechanisms. Job rotations is one, and it's a fabulous way too. A lot of people are talking about high potentials these days. So these are people that are maybe not at the director level yet, but they are really have a lot of potential. And so they'll do special projects for them. And then of course, there's always training. And we've seen all of those be valuable. But one of the things that we don't often hear talked about is really what is that strategic thinking? So what exactly are we trying to get these folks to do other than just, work in different environments and challenge themselves? And so I find that this notion of toggling is quite a powerful one. And what does it really mean? It really means moving between different perspectives, different ways to frame questions. And we find that that increases the strategic considerations. And it's really valuable when you're toggling to know what you're trying to toggle between. And we use opportunity thinking and some very simple, easy to remember principles in opportunity thinking as a way of thinking about how to toggle. So let me give you some examples of those. These examples are built on the foundation of opportunity thinking, and opportunity thinking is described in a book that I wrote. It's called You Can Kill an Idea, but You Can't Kill an Opportunity. And even in that title, there's a toggle, right? You can kill an idea, but you can't kill an opportunity. So it's that juxtaposition of ideas and opportunities. Unfortunately, the book has been quite successful. It's been translated into a couple different languages and cited in some other books and is in its fourth printing. It also, by the way, has pictures. So it allows you to kind of move between pictures and stories and different learning modalities. So be sure to contact us if you'd like to get a copy of the book. So I'm going to talk about 4 different ways of toggling. And one is between outside in and inside out. So thinking externally and bringing that into your corporation, or thinking internally and bringing that out. Another way is top down versus bottom up. And you'll see that a lot with executives that think kind of top down, and the team members think more bottom up. And sometimes the two don't really meet very well. Strategy versus structure. And that's, what's the overall strategy versus what are the structures? And when I say structure, I don't just mean org structure. It could be any set of structures. It could be processes, tools, measurements, rewards, any number of structures. And then interestingly, the last one you may never have heard of really is an engineering mindset versus a scientific mindset. So let's jump in. Outside in versus inside out. Okay, so outside in versus inside out, being biased towards inside out. That is what happens is most organizations, people are kind of biased towards thinking about, hey, we make this stuff, we can go deliver it to the rest of the market. And they're a little late to think about outside in. And outside in really requires new disciplines. So thinking externally first really requires really true new disciplines and frameworks. And that definition of opportunity is a big help for that. So let's look at the definition of opportunity. Well, it comes from the word opportune. It actually means into port. And it turns out late 1300s, people were getting into all kinds of new ports. And I would think, I was a marketing professor, business strategy professor for a long time. And I would have thought that the port was the opportunity. And certainly the needs in the market are part of the opportunity. But it wasn't what they were referring to. So then you might imagine, well, maybe it was the cool stuff that they were inventing at the time, because it was actually a time of great innovation And they were coming up with these new value propositions. And so logically, one might think, well, that's where the opportunity was. But again, it wasn't what they were referring to. What they were referring to was the conditions, which were the tide and the wind that allowed the boat to make it that final mile into port, because without that, the boat would stall. These were sailboats. And so they'd stall like a mile outside of port and all the goods would rot. And so what they saw was you have to have that combination. You really have to have that combination of the need in the market, the value that you can create, and the conditions that bring the two together. Now, hopefully you're already seeing kind of the secret here in terms of toggling is we've got a few different things we can toggle between. And I'm going to give you an example to further illustrate this. So Kodak, we can always kind of, unfortunately, pick on them a little bit because interestingly, they were both ahead of the market and behind the market for the same product innovation. Now they saw a need. I actually do remember those cameras and they weren't necessarily that great. The film wasn't that durable and it could be damaged through exposure. And so Kodak thought, you know, hey, we could do digital photography. And that's that big kind of hunky thing there in the middle with the blue. And granted, that wasn't the right form factor, but even if they'd gotten to the right form factor, which is that little slim point and click, the conditions weren't right. So back when they launched this, the conditions weren't right. We didn't have mechanisms for sorting photos and so forth. So we had parts of an opportunity, but not all of the opportunity. And to really have opportunity, we have to have all of the opportunity. We have to have all three of those pieces. Now, if we were to just take an inside-out view, the piece that we would be focused on would be the value that we could create today. So we would be thinking, you know, hey, we make these polymers. What else can we do with these polymers? Hey, we make these shampoos. What else can we do with these shampoos? What could we add to it? But an outside-in perspective really brings in all three pieces. It brings in the conditions, which is the trends, brings in needs, which is a customer focus, and it also brings in the value propositions of the future. Now, we can't just think value propositions of the future. We also have to think about what we're capable of doing. So DuPont isn't all of a sudden going to say, oh, gee, look, there's opportunities in fast food. I think we'll go be McDonald's for the day. That doesn't make any sense. So we have to toggle. We have to toggle between what the market and the trends are demanding of us and what kinds of new capabilities we could leverage and what we can do internally. And if we go back and forth, if we get really comfortable with moving back and forth and we feel like we're equipped to think in both realms, that tends to create the greatest opportunity. And I'll give an example with DSM. Now, DSM is a Dutch company. They have a phenomenal portfolio of polymers and scientific polymers, as well as a nutritional portfolio. And they came to us with their product called Dyneema. Now, Dyneema is the strongest fiber in the world. It's a lot like Kevlar, and it's used in nets, fishing line, rope, and also in bulletproof vests. And they had kind of tapped out their markets. So every time they thought about, gee, what could we do? They went back to more nets, more fishing line, more rope, but they tapped it out. So let's see what we did. Well, we had to think outside in to be able to solve this problem because the inside out wasn't getting us there. So we started with the conditions and we thought, okay, what's going on with specialized materials? And some of the things that we saw was that the conditions were changing. The conditions in which these specialized high-end materials were becoming more extreme. They were becoming more dangerous in many cases. The conditions in which people were doing jobs were oftentimes in more extreme, more dangerous conditions. Materials were sometimes more scarce. Sometimes the work was being done in more remote areas that we think about mining and drilling and, you know, place where specialty materials, people are willing to spend a lot on materials were, you know, more extreme. And yet at the same time, we were looking for greater sustainability and a more global supply chain. And so we took that and we said, okay, well, let's now start looking at these extreme conditions and let's look at the needs. And what we found was that there were needs in, for example, outdoor furniture. Now, that might not sound real extreme, but there's a growth in the area of outdoor patios and outdoor dining and outdoor, you know, barbecues. And so these conditions that the furniture were in were more extreme. You'll see a big raft there. Inflatables were being used in more extreme conditions with all of the emergencies and natural disasters that we're having. We see mining in more extreme conditions, and we saw a lot more in the area of explosives. And even though they'd already done bulletproof vests, we didn't see as much in explosives and airline safety, and then even sports down in the bottom right-hand corner, more extreme conditions. And so we started looking at the value. What were some things that we could do in the future? So we really just did a lot of brainstorming this outside in and saw that we could take those same materials and create value through, you can see there, extreme condition tents that are made with these materials. This was an interesting one, this chain on the right-hand side. They'd always done ropes, but they hadn't done chains. And so we saw that we could create chains with this material. So that was a little bit closer in. We see gloves there for very dangerous kinds of sharp types of tasks. And then more in the area of dealing with explosives to protect different people, different audiences. And then interestingly, we saw some things in extreme sports. So the material started to be included into jeans and extreme sporting clothing. And interestingly, they kind of considered some of these things in the past, but the conditions weren't right. So now we saw a convergence of the conditions, the needs, the value propositions that were needed in the future, as well as the capabilities that Dyneema itself had. And so opportunity thinking really led to more strategic thinking, using this outside in and inside out. It allowed us to kind of toggle between them. And we did. We kept going back and forth. We'd hear about an application. We'd go back to Dyneema, find out if it was possible to meet that application. And in fact, one of the things that we did to toggle was we brought groups of people together. We brought the inside people together with the outside people. We actually went and got people that were working in inflatables and outdoor furniture and extreme sports, and we brought them together with the Dyneema people, because it's not really all about the consultant, right? It's about that experience that your internal people have. So we did something we call an eco immersion, where we immersed the inside team with an ecosystem, and that immersion created automatic toggling, right? Just the conversations were toggling back and forth. And it was quite a dynamic setting. We did this all in 1 week, had about 8 different sessions with 8 different industries, and it was a phenomenal amount of insight. And as you can imagine, that helped the staff themselves. I was just speaking with the folks at DSM the other day. It's been 10 years now since we did that work. And they said that 75% of the new applications that they've been working in the last 10 years have come from that original project that we did. So embedding that definition of opportunity forces outside in and inside out thinking. You can't think need, value, conditions without forcing your organization to think outside in and inside out. And this has become such an important tool that we have organizations like Harley-Davidson, Sherwin-Williams, other organizations that have this notion of need, value, conditions posted on their walls, embedded in their literature, because it is so instrumental in that constant toggling between, okay, I have an idea, is there a need? Okay, I see a trend, do we have a capability? And it's really easy for an organization to adopt this and communicate it across the company. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a second. I don't see any questions quite yet. Love to get some questions.
Let's pause for a second. This is very rich stuff, but I'm also surprised I don't see any questions yet. Is anybody awake out there? I do have a question. If you go back to the previous slide, and maybe that lets other people give other people time to think of theirs. I continue in my environment to be shocked on how inside out companies keep thinking. And so, yeah, and I like in my lectures, I like to talk about, guys, you need to develop an edge-centric view. Be proud of what you have and keep pushing it, obviously. And that's part of the other side of your toggle. But also step back from it, step away from it, I should say, and look at the bigger picture, look at the outside-in thinking. But many companies find it so hard to do, and they fall by the wayside. I mean, in the end, they lose. And here I see you say it's easy to adopt across an organization. Why do I then still see so many companies that are finding it hard to do? What is it in your experience?
It's really interesting. I think people are so swamped with work, and since the recession, truthfully, a lot of folks are doing multiple jobs. And so I do have some compassion towards folks for being a little bit more inside out. They are doing multiple jobs, they have 250 emails a day, and it's kind of the tyranny of the urgent, right? So the urgent is the 250 emails. And interestingly, I think it's also a problem with how that outside perspective is brought. So much insight is being brought to people right now in the form of trends. And, you can get a report on anything you want, IoT, the future of agriculture. I mean, literally just you could get 10 great reports on the future of agriculture or IoT or digital. I think there are not great mechanisms for translating that into the organization, and that's probably a separate talk on how we do that translation. But I do think it's kind of a couple things. I think they're really swamped, so a little bit of grace there. But I also think that the outside in is a little difficult to digest. I will say one thing that I've seen that's been really great is I think companies have advanced. Since I started the company 17 years ago, we've seen companies really advance in terms of voice of the customer. But I don't know if that's helping them as much as they'd hoped, because a lot of times the customer is thinking too close in themselves. And so I think sometimes that forces an inside out view too, because the customer says, yeah, I want the same thing, but I want it cheaper. So just voice of the customer doesn't seem to be adequate. So I do think you have to combine those needs with the conditions. And honest to goodness, the easiest way to do it is to get a hold of the ecosystem. We find it is so powerful I found out that people don't actually want to read my big market research reports. I know you're out there. I know you've gotten a market research report and thought, oh, I've got more to do. So instead of giving people more work to do, we just started finding interesting people and bringing them to our clients. And so I do think that firsthand contact is probably the easiest way to solve it.
So indeed, I mean, the inside out and going beyond that, the big challenge is we're too busy being busy, right?
Yeah.
And Kathy, Kathy Pagliaro is saying that too. Human beings are creatures of habit also, which is linked to that. I mean, we love to do what we know how to do.
It's comfortable.
So getting beyond that is difficult. And I think you also mentioned the other side, which is there's so much out there in terms of the outside in, but then how do you link it to the business? And that's the power of the toggling, right? That's where you need to make that connection so that you don't lose yourself in all sorts of opportunities, but you stay true to that stretched core, if you want. So that's good. Thank you. Gloria is asking a few questions. Let me see. The first one, Gloria Hills. Is there any of the four approaches being discussed more advantageous than others? Let's keep that to the end of the conversation, if you don't mind.
Good question.
And then the other one is, has those organizations you've partnered with leveraged the combination of these approaches already? Did those decisions depend upon the size of the organization? So is it easier to do in small outfits versus larger outfits? Maybe you want to go and give some perspective on that specific one.
Gloria, you're rocking it. Those are awesome questions. So we do see some organizations embedding this. Harley Davidson, literally, we can walk around and they may not know the name New Edge per se, every single staff member, but they certainly know need, value, conditions. So it's everywhere. DSM actually took our methodology, embedded it. Procter & Gamble embedded the methodologies as their corporate R&D strategy methodology. So we do see organizations doing that. Sometimes I think it is easier for smaller companies to do it. There's a little bit of a scrappiness there that just says, well, I'm just going to go find some people. I think in large companies, sometimes people are like, well, isn't that market research responsibility? Am I allowed to go do that? So one company, Sabic, was really interesting. We actually trained their staff how to do interviews. And we've done this at several companies, and they just go out and they do it themselves. And most of the staff have said this was the most important career tool they ever learned, was how to go out and talk to people. And everybody comes back and they say, wow, you ask people questions and they're happy to help. And I think there's fear too that, and particularly in Asia, we trained a large group of folks from Asia in how to go and ask questions. And at first it felt like it would be really difficult and inappropriate in the culture. But actually they found that most people were really excited to be asked for their expertise. So I do think just some training and how to ask people questions, how to find people that are interesting, and then just a confidence that, people actually want to help.
So educate people and then break through the silos. Connect the different parts of the organization, and as we talked, connect the inside out versus the outside in. Let's move into the next section before we run out of time on this one, because now the questions start to pop in.
Awesome. Okay, top down versus bottom up. And I do think, Gloria, the inside out, outside in is mission critical. If nothing else, that one has to be there. So it's a great question. Top down versus bottom up, really interesting. Have you ever seen a situation where the executives communicated a vision and they said, well, I've told you what to do, why aren't you doing it? And the staff are like, I don't think that's very clear. The staff, meanwhile, for example, will take a vision, and let's say DuPont, we did their additive manufacturing strategy, 3D printing, and the CTO says, yeah, let's focus on additive manufacturing. And by the end of the day, every staff member has gone and bought their own 3D printer. And so we see this kind of granularity and busyness at the bottom up level, but not always a lot of clarity at the top down level. And I think it's great to frame this more as opportunities and ideas. And if we can talk that way, I think we will find that the two will meet a little bit more easily. So think of an idea like a koi fish, and an opportunity is like a pond. Okay, why do I say that? Because it turns out that if you put a koi fish in a little fish bowl on your desk, it's going to stay small. And if you put it in a big pond, it's going to get big. So if you really want a big fish, you have to have a big pond. But it also stands that in an idea and an opportunity, if you want a big idea, you have to have a big opportunity. And a lot of times we wake up, go for our jog or whatever, and we have these wonderful ideas, and maybe even they're defying the laws of physics, not really, but maybe they're close to, and yet if there's no market for them, as in the case of Kodak, it's not really an opportunity. So what we've found is if you can get people to toggle between the opportunity, which is kind of a top-down perspective, a kind of a big amorphous thing, and the idea, which is the granular way of solving for the opportunity, that you get a lot of strength. And I'll give an example. We were in at Sherwin-Williams, and we asked a room of people. We'd done some training. We asked a room of people. Somebody gave us an opportunity, and somebody said, "Oh, I know it's nail polish." And we thought, well, that's not really an opportunity. It's probably an idea. But how did you come to that idea? And most people would say, really unlikely that Sherwin-Williams is going to sell Sherwin-Williams nail polish. And so let's see what that person thought. Well, underneath an idea that probably wasn't the best idea on the planet, this person had a phenomenal opportunity insight. They said, young people are super engaged with color. They put it all kinds of places we never expected them to. They have no boundaries with color. Here we are, the masters of color, and we don't engage with a younger audience until they're in their 30s when they own their first wall. So is there a way to engage a younger audience in the brand and decorating with color? Now, once this person was able to kind of get out of idea mode and actually kind of express those underlying opportunity insights, the room erupted with some phenomenal ideas, really good ideas, better than nail polish. So decals and painting sets and partnerships with PB and ways that parents and children could start engaging decorating and tools and just all kinds of things. And so here we had this rather unexciting idea, unrealistic idea that had it come out in a brainstorming session would have been killed, but underneath it was this rich opportunity insight. Once we got to the rich opportunity insight from that rather unexciting idea, the room came up with lots of great ideas. So this is evidence that we can toggle. If we know the difference between opportunities and ideas, we can toggle between them. And so if you think of top down as those opportunities, and if our execs can get better at articulating specifically the opportunities, and our teams are good at understanding how to go back and forth between opportunities and ideas, it will make both bigger. So let's go to some questions on that one.
Yeah, let me, first of all, I really find this powerful in terms of having the ideas guide the opportunities. Very often I see there's what I call the hangover, the weekend post-it hangover. A lot of creativity, 50,000 post-its on the wall in a chateau of some kind, and then you come back on Monday morning, you're like, what are we going to do with all these ideas? Because they have no bearing to your business. And so having this, going through this toggling again, it makes the connection between the high end and the pragmatism, as you called it earlier as well. I think this is a nice, this area of top-down versus bottom-up is a nice one to get to the question from Heather Scott, who says, or Schott, who says, have you ever seen any organizations tie this approach into their diversity and inclusion disciplines to make sure that you connect, at least is my interpretation, that you connect the bottom-up with the top-down?
Oh my gosh, that is a really stunning question. I was just, I serve on a diversity and inclusion council for the community that I live in. And we actually just brought in a pastor who had done a lot of work for, NATO, and he'd been in the military, and he'd served in Afghanistan, actually working on building out the religious culture of Islam in Afghanistan post-war. And so he had a phenomenal experience. And he said that the top down, he didn't describe it as top down, but it's such a stunning question. The top down is about that higher order goal that we can all agree to, which is actually community. And so he said, when we have a football team in town that's winning, everybody is a Hanford Hawk or a whatever it is. We're all behind that football team. We all have a common goal. And he said, when you frame it as diversity, he said, I'm a white guy. He said, I'm not included in that. I automatically feel like I'm not included in that. He said, but when you frame it as community, that's the higher order goal. And then you start talking about how inclusion and how diversity fits into that. And so I think that there are some top-down, bottom-up ways. I have never seen an organization do it, but it's something I'm kind of hot on the trail of personally and in my, kind of more of my community service life. And we really are trying to think about how do we frame this so everybody actually believes that they're part of this and we understand the higher order goal, because we all do value community and respect and putting love ahead of judgment. And so, we may not all value that, but that would be the higher order goal. So it's a great question. I'm going to give that quite a bit more thought, and I'd love to talk to you offline about it.
Yeah, well, also let's talk about, as we talked yesterday, one of our next webcasts is going to be about culture of innovation. And I think this question segs nicely into that topic. So let's take it on and watch this space, Heather, and everybody else. We're going to come back and get into more detail in one of the later webcasts when we talk culture of innovation. Let's move on to our next chapter or quadrant.
Great. Okay, so strategy versus structure. Boy, this is a bailiwick that people fall into. Again, outside in, inside out a little bit, but they kind of rely very heavily on their current structures. They say, well, we can't do that. We don't have the people in that region. We don't have this. We don't have that. Or, hey, we have these structures, therefore we can do this. Again, thinking broadly about structures as processes, people, roles, rewards, not just who's reporting to whom. Now, if you think of strategy as the opportunity and structure as the way that we execute against that opportunity, I find that a simpler way to think about it, because honest to goodness, everybody's definition of strategy is different. But if we say, hey, we're going after this opportunity, we understand this opportunity, what are the ways to structure? Now, you'll hear the notion that structure should always follow strategy. And that's true, that if you form a new strategic plan, but you leave your structures exactly as they are, I can guarantee you that your new strategic plan is not going to be met. It can't be the other way around. Structure will predetermine strategy in some cases, but usually accidentally. So if we say that structure should follow strategy, then what that also means is that structure, if we only look through that lens, like what we have currently, then it can sometimes restrict our opportunities. I'll give you an example of that. We worked with Procter & Gamble, and we worked particularly in their area of baby care. And one of the many areas that baby care for them really means Pampers and diapers and wipes. And as we look at the world, that's kind of a developed world thing. We like to diaper our babies and toss it in the trash. And developing nations weren't really using disposable diapers, and yet there's actually a lot of benefits from a hygiene standpoint and a health standpoint of disposable diapers. Now, one of the problems that P&G faced, though, was that two major competitors, and sometimes in other categories, Colgate, Unilever, and Kimberly-Clark, actually three competitors, had beaten them to some of these developing nations. And they were concerned about Africa. They said, we're always like, we're late to these developing nations, and we want to figure out, like, how can we play in Africa? But as we looked at the current structures, and sorry that's not showing up real clearly, but baby care cannot really win in Africa. And that was the conclusion that folks drew. Baby care really can't win in Africa. And why can it not win in Africa? Well, because poverty. people don't have money for a diaper. They need water. They need clean water. And so what we did was we backed up and we said, okay, look, we have this current structure. It's to sell diapers and make a certain margin. And sure enough, that structure is not going to work in Africa. But let's step back and let's look at some of the strategic elements here, and let's think about opportunity. And not just think about opportunity as, what can we do, but opportunity informed by all of the conditions. And so what did we say? Well, poverty wasn't going to change anytime soon. And traditional business models were failing. And so there weren't a lot of retail brands in Africa, particularly rural Africa. But we also saw some advances in social entrepreneurship, so new business models. So that's one of the social entrepreneurship is getting folks involved in starting businesses and so forth, like women-owned businesses, things like that. We also looked at the needs. And again, biggest need, clean water. Okay, so that kind of trumps diapers. If I can't find clean water, I'm not going to be really worried about buying a disposable diaper. But a strategy is informed by all those needs. So yes, I needed clean water. And yes, it was more important in many ways than hygiene. But hygiene saves lives too. And in fact, we brought in somebody from the CDC to talk about this, and it was gut-wrenching. The extent to which we could save lives just by removing waste from the environment and segregating it was phenomenal. And another need that we saw was that people in rural areas didn't really have access to anything, clean water, products, hygiene, anything. Okay, so opportunity opened our eyes then to new structures. We saw an opportunity. We said, okay, we need to get clean water. We also need to get hygiene. We need to get access to rural areas. So we don't really know if that's something that's possible from a structure standpoint, but let's go out and now with that lens, see if there are some new structures we could play with. Well, sure enough, across the other side of P&G was Pure, which was their water cleaning product. And that hadn't even been on the table. And of course we had Pampers, but we also had all the other P&G hygiene products. So soap and feminine hygiene and shampoos and toothpaste. We had all of these hygiene products. We also could start thinking about social entrepreneurship. Granted, it wasn't a structure that P&G had, but it was a structure that existed in the world. And we also started thinking about the brand differently. The brand focus had been on Pampers. What if the brand was overall P&G? And then we also started thinking about structures around transportation of goods. How were goods getting to these rural areas? So some of these structures were internal, some of them were potentially new structures. Okay, so Pure was certainly one opportunity area. And what ended up happening was we actually built a social entrepreneurship model, created these vans. This one's labeled Pampers, but others were labeled P&G, had all of these products in there, and then had Pure, and created a social entrepreneurship model where women could take these products to their communities. They would give away Pure, and then they would sell on the back of it individual sachets, so individual items of diapers, toothpaste, feminine hygiene. And these individual diapers, it may not sound like it's really moving the needle, but it was, because if you have a child with diarrhea and you need to basically take care of that, this was a lifesaver, gave the child a better night's sleep and created greater health. Okay, so what ended up happening? Well, toggling between that strategy and structure, believe it or not, led to the largest channel for P&G in rural Africa. And we did it through a new structure, a partnership between P&G and some nonprofits, but also created a money-making channel for P&G and a mechanism for getting P&G's name out. And on top of that, lives have been saved. Lives have been saved through clean water and through hygiene. So let's take a break here and talk about maybe some questions around strategy and structure.
Let's see if there are any. At this point, they're not. And let me make a comment. One, thank you for this story. It's close to my heart after 30 years at Procter & Gamble. Wonderful, what's the word? Intervention, I guess, that's happened in Africa. The one thing that strikes me here from my side is, and I always tell my students, use structure only as a verb. This new world, please don't go and use structure as a noun. You need to be able to break through structures. And so, of course, you need some structuring around it, but that needs to be agile and versatile. It needs to even go beyond the company. And that's why I love your point as well, that go beyond your company boundaries and look for ecosystem partners or partners in your ecosystem. I think that can be very, very powerful. It also strikes me as I listen to you, and I had not even internalized this when we talked this yesterday, is that if you want to go to the panacea or the holy grail of business model innovation versus product innovation or service innovation or process innovation, then you need to be able to break through your structure, right? Yeah. So in a sense, this is a prerequisite. This element of toggling is a prerequisite of getting you into innovating into new business models. But any thoughts on that?
I think that's stellar. First, I love the notion of using structure as a verb. That is very powerful. I love that. And then on the business model, I totally agree. I think we've got to put those things on the table. And in my book, I've got something called the 6 sources of opportunity, which expands on the need, value, conditions a little bit. So it says that the way we create value is through our technologies, our brands, and our business models. And so anytime we think about how do we create value, there's a structural element to it. And our business models are one of those structures. So I love that. And interestingly, it's juxtaposed against the organization, meaning that there tends to be a lot of tension. You mess with the business model and you're messing with the organization. It stresses people out, but it is by far one of the more powerful forms of innovation.
Cool. And then we do have a question now. Rita, hey Rita, nice of you to join us. Rita's my partner. Is system an alternate word for the structure concept? Would it be a better word? I'll let you answer that, Pam. I have a thought, but I'll let you answer it. It's your webcast.
I like that. I think, though, I tend to look at a system very broadly. And so I include in the system the whole ecosystem, so the need and the value and the conditions. But when I look at the organization itself and its system, I think of things like, manufacturing and commerce and HR and so some of the functional elements. And I do think there's a huge structure. So I think, yes, I think it could be viewed that way, but I tend to even take the system more broadly. But I do like that when we think about structures, we need to have a systems thinking approach to thinking about all of the structures. And I find that a lot of times we miss them. And what's really crazy is that sometimes you can change a structure. Somebody could change their work schedule and we think, yeah, big deal, right? But all of a sudden the teams aren't functioning as well because the person's not around. Minor structural changes can have ripple effects and they can actually affect our strategy. So I think having systems thinking is invaluable.
So systems, yes, but think about it in terms of system thinking and go very broad. And that includes your ecosystems. Excellent, thank you. Claudio Truzzi, thanks Claudio for your comment and question, an excellent one. How do you, and Pam, I guess this is about, question to what's your experience here, how to involve senior management in toggling from strategy to structure and adapt the latter to the former? So how do you go and make senior management comfortable of going the other way, again, living with the bottom up?
Yeah, so great question. I find that senior management, unfortunately, tend to be, even though they should be very strategy oriented, oftentimes have grown up in the organization and have been promoted because they were just really good at operations. And so no offense to folks that are out there, but a lot of C-suite people have grown up by just being spectacular at the operations piece, which means that a lot of times they're still quite wed to structures. So we have a framework, which we can talk about offline, but it kind of gets them rooted more in the future. So it's an outside-in view. So if we can get them more rooted in an outside-in view, that gets them to more openness in terms of strategy, which gets them to start thinking more openly about possible structures. And then when they start thinking about structures that are internal, but also external, and we do that through something we call a build, borrow, buy matrix. So build, what structures can I build on and leverage? What do I need to borrow through open innovation? And what do I need to maybe acquire? That also helps them stretch. So we get to strategies, we say, okay, wide range of opportunities here. Some of them may be a good fit and some of them are not. If we can get to that opportunity landscape, then we can narrow down in that opportunity landscape by characterizing each opportunity on this build, borrow, buy basis, and then creating a portfolio of opportunities that are a range of some that really leverage internal capabilities and some that stretch us to external capabilities. So I think it's more of a process, giving them a really good, strong process that goes from the view of the future, to the opportunity landscape, to then choosing opportunities that both leverage and stretch our current structures, and then going into a next phase of activity where we're really just saying, are all of our structures lined up for success in this area?
Yeah, I think process is an important one, and of course get to structure. The other one, which I think is to be worked on, is mindset, which is very often people are in fixed versus growth, and the more senior you get, sometimes you feel the more fixed they are. One additional thought from my side, folks, by the way, is we have this saying in Dutch, which is strange eyes force. Sometimes you need to bring an outside view in to go and drive your credibility or your impact. And by the way, this is where Pam can help with her company. There's one opportunity you have. Let's move into the next subject and the last quadrant.
Okay, so engineering versus a scientific mindset. This might be a little bit less familiar to you, but it's something that I saw. Married to a scientist, work with a ton of engineers, work with a ton of scientists, and have hired people with scientific and engineering backgrounds. And pretty early on, I saw there were some pretty big differences. And as I think about engineers are not all, and this is a very broad brush, so if you're an engineer, apologetic. It's not that engineers don't actually think more scientifically and push the boundaries, but by definition, engineers are there, particularly those that execute, to live within the boundaries. We don't build bridges and then say, I think I'll roll like 5 times the weight across this bridge and just see what happens. We build bridges to live within the tolerances of the materials, and usually pretty well within the tolerances. We don't want problems, and hallelujah for engineers. Now, scientists love to push the boundaries. We're always going to be testing the boundaries, and we will test those materials and see how much they'll hold, and we'll do experiments, right? And so it's a very experimental mindset. Okay, so why are these two mindsets really valuable to innovation? Well, when we think about that opportunity formula, we think about need plus value plus conditions. One element is how we create value. And a lot of times in innovation, you've been in these innovation sessions and it's like, no idea is a bad idea, anything goes. And honest to goodness, I have been in 2 different innovation sessions where people were talking about how we needed to make a pill that you could take that was dehydrated water. Okay, now I'm pretty sure dehydrated water isn't a thing. Okay, but we've been in 2 sessions where literally people would say this and people are like, yeah, sure, let's think about that. Okay, so nothing is off the table. Okay, I agree. That's great. Scientific mindset, we're going to push the boundaries. But what I also find is that we sometimes ignore the constraints until too late. And we don't actually use the constraints, those boundaries that engineers live within, to actually help us innovate. And so we bring engineers into these brainstorming sessions and we expect them to think outside of the boundaries, and we do, but then we go back and we find out that not a lot of those ideas actually are going to stick around. And so if we don't have both perspectives, we tend to fail. Now that might sound like an obvious thing, but I want to challenge a little bit about how we bring those perspectives. Some work that we did for PepsiCo in India, they had a product called Slice, which was just a beverage. And they asked us, what can we do in the area of mango? And so we did all the kinds of outside-in thinking, consumer homes, markets, restaurants, grocery stores, scavenger hunts where we go out and look at what's available, and consumer groups. So did a bunch of research all around the country. And we looked at the conditions. And so the conditions were, one of the major conditions was more street food. So there was a lot more, eating out on the go, and people moving from one part of the country to another. And so they weren't always getting the food that they wanted in this new part of the country. So that's just one of many conditions. Another thing was that we saw needs. And so we saw that the mango itself met a lot of needs. It met certain needs for just food. It met needs for ceremony. It was used in a variety of kind of agricultural ceremonies and even given as gifts at weddings. And so mangoes were meeting a lot of different physical as well as socio-cultural needs. Now, what were the ways that we create value? Well, there are ways to create value with mango through all kinds of different things. You saw it paired with almost every food. It was used sweet and spicy and with milk and as a beverage and as a main dish, as a side, as a snack, as a candy. So a myriad of ways that PepsiCo could go with mango. So what we decided to do was dimensionalize this. And I'm going to use these dimensions to show both scientific thinking and engineering thinking. Now, if you look down on the left side, everything's about the way Pepsi does things today. They, like with Tropicana, they take a bunch of different kinds of oranges, mix them together until it tastes the same every time. But what if we stretched our thinking and said, well, what if we didn't do that? What if every time you drank this beverage, it tastes different? Sounds weird, but, worth thinking about. Okay, PepsiCo is built on having a stable supply. But unfortunately, in India, you don't have a stable supply. You have a volatile supply chain. PepsiCo is based on mainstream. We said, well, what if a product ended up being more edgy or sexy? PepsiCo uses off-the-shelf packaging. What if it was custom packaging? PepsiCo is based on always having availability. What if the product was actually scarce? And in some cases, some of these mangoes, there's 1,000 different mangoes, by the way, in India, different varietals. What if there was some scarcity? And PepsiCo is always looking for the favorites. But what if this was more about variety seeking? Okay, so I'll show you where we ended up. Where we ended up was identifying across this a bunch of different opportunity areas. So one was about the naughty green mango, which was a green mango beverage that people would drink when it was kind of not ripe yet. There was one that was about center of the plate, one that was about being mixed with dairy. But the one in the center was the one we ended up choosing, which will sound kind of obvious. It was called Mangoes of India, but it was really more about those varietals. So what if we really leveraged those varietals? Okay, so we did something we call a rapid brewery, which is really that agile build, test, build, created product, tested it with the ecosystem, created product, tested it with the ecosystem over a few days, and eventually came to something that was a really different platform. And what that was a series of beverages here, and you can barely read it, but down there in the fine print are 3 different mango beverages from 3 different mangoes, Bang Nepali, Dusheri, and Kesar. And we decided to go with these varietals and have one beverage for each of 3 very popular varietals. Now, why? Because actually we didn't ignore the engineering mindset. Now, I'll give you real quick, it led to a huge launch. There was a movie star involved. And the notion was that you're going to get these varietals while they last. We're going to actually leverage scarcity. We're actually going to buy into this volatile supply chain. We're going to embrace that as a true boundary that we need to live within. And we're going to create a product that sits within those realistic boundaries. I mean, nothing I'm going to do is ever going to change the fact that there's not a cold chain in India and that we can't store mangoes forever. And so what we ended up doing was coming to this area where we had these 3 products. And we embraced that there was a volatile supply chain. We embraced that there was scarcity, which meant we were embracing the engineering mindset. We also used the scientific mindset to say it can taste different across these 3 products. In fact, they did taste different. The packaging and the product is a little bit edgier, sexier, it's custom packaging, and we're enabling variety seeking. But I think the key is we balanced boundaries with stretching. And I think that's a really important thing in innovation because there's a sense like, oh, boundaries, that makes us uninnovative. I don't think so. I think living within some boundaries requires greater creativity. And I think this is where a lot of innovation falls down. So these value dimensions allow us to both live within and stretch boundaries, which creates innovations that are both executable and breakthrough. So what are some key takeaways? I'll cover that in a second, but let me go to some questions. I know we just have a few more minutes.
See, there's no question at this point. I call this, and I guess, again, I'm internalizing it while you talk so eloquently, is this is freedom in a box, right? I like to talk about that, and I refer to it with autonomy. Autonomy is responsibility and freedom, or accountability and freedom, and so that needs to work. Those 2 things need to come together, and I think you're shaping that in your toggling dimension, which I think is very powerful.
Good. I like that. I like the freedom in a box. I personally think adding some of those boundaries forces us to be more creative. I think it's a little lazy, truthfully, to say anything goes and we don't have to think about that. I think that balancing and the dimensions really spell it out, right? Because you can circle them. You can say, this is a boundary condition. This is where we want to stretch, and toggling back and forth. So just some key takeaways that toggling between these multiple perspectives creates more strategic thinking. And I think that the frameworks are really critical for that. You can't just say, hey, go toggle. We got to give people some simple frameworks. So opportunity equals need plus value plus conditions. It forces that outside in and inside out thinking and promotes growth. Toggling between opportunities versus ideas, we've had people that have said that alone has transformed how they think. It allows kind of top down and bottom up thinking and execution versus a bigger opportunity externally. And I think it increases strategic creativity, like the example with the nail polish. We got to an entirely new opportunity through an idea. And equally, the opportunity, once articulated, then generated new ideas. We have moving between opportunities and structures leads to new opportunities. So it enables building new capabilities. So getting clear on opportunities, looking back in, what do we have structurally that could help? Looking back out, what do we have externally that could help? Build, borrow, buy. And then using the dimensions to stretch and bound how we create value allows both that scientific and the engineering mindsets, and it builds innovations that are breakthrough as well as executable. And then Gloria had asked that question about, which of these is most valuable? And I have to say, like, if you don't do the outside in, you're going to be in trouble. But I think equally, you can do all that outside in thinking. And if you're just thinking ideas, that's a problem. So I can go outside in and do trends work and needs, and then just generate ideas and ideas and ideas and ideas and never be clear on the opportunity. So I have to say opportunities versus ideas is pretty critical. For the organization, then, if you're not clear on how to loosen the boundaries on structures and then bring it back in. So I'm having a hard time choosing, Gloria. I guess I would say the first two are mission critical. Like, you don't have those. You can't think outside in, and you can't toggle between opportunities and ideas. It's going to be a problem. Ultimately, though, for the company to make money, you've got to be able to realign structures against strategy. And I think for any innovation session itself, that scientific engineering mindset is pretty important. So sorry, not being very helpful. Other questions?
No, I think that's not fair. I think you are very helpful. And I love what you're saying as well, which is in the end, this is the power of your toggling concepts across those 4 dimensions. And as I've shared my perception a few times throughout the conversation, I've been thinking about those concepts maybe slightly differently, but seeing it in this way, in an integrated sort of format and framework in terms of how you set up your strategy is, I think, very helpful. And guys, I mean, we all know it, right? I mean, in this world, you got to go and get your strategies right. If you got it wrong, you lose a few years or months even, and you may fall behind. So that's, I think, this adds to the power and the importance of this webcast. Do you want to make a final comment, Pam?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so how do you apply this to your organization? We've done this through some high potential projects. So, for example, took about 60 people at Harley-Davidson through a series of projects. We've done that at Sabic, a bunch of companies. And I think that's one way to do it. Go get a bunch of high potentials, get them thinking like this. It was so successful at Harley, they're not needing us to help them at this moment because they've embedded all those practices in there. I think training and team sessions are another way to really help. So just teaching somebody opportunities versus ideas. We did it at 3M, believe it or not. They're so great at innovation, but they said the most valuable thing was opportunities versus ideas. And that could even be just a talk. So, for example, the third thing is the book. And then book talks, they'll come and give talks. And even then, just giving people a notion of opportunities versus ideas. I have more people come to me and say that alone has been helpful, and that simple formula of need, value, conditions. So I think there's a lot of ways in which kind of toe in the water to bigger projects that can really help folks think. But I do think really simple frameworks and understanding this notion of toggling is pretty helpful.
Excellent. Well, that gets us exactly 1 minute before the hour. And so what is this? This is the last comment I want to make before. Obviously, I thank Pam and Matt for your support, but Pam for your very eloquent presentation, which frankly illustrates what as I said before, a very powerful concept for us to consider. Any follow-up anybody wants, you can reach out to Pam, you can reach out to us at the conference board. We'd love to go and provide some more perspective in case of need or connections, whatever you find helpful. And that leads me to thanking you as an audience as well for spending the hour with us. I hope you found your time well invested. Please don't leave before doing your feedback again, so we get a better sense of whether you liked or not, and what you specifically liked and not, and what you recommend us to do next. Any new ideas for webcasts, by the way? We're very open for that as well. So thank you for that. The last plug in the previous slide was if you're interested, if you find this whole space interesting, the whole innovation space, strategy, leadership, culture, the whole space around innovation and productivity, then please reach out to us and join some of our publications or some of our councils. We have an innovation council in the US, we have one in Europe, and we'd love to have you come and join us. Thank you. Thanks again, Pam. Thanks to everyone. I wish you a very good evening, afternoon, or day ahead of you, and I hope to see you again shortly when we continue this sequence of webcasts. Thanks on behalf of the Conference Board. Bye-bye.